Round 6 of the 2021 GTR24H EEW season, Le Mans, is presented in partnership with Viper Gaming by Patriot, Azatec, Global Flix, Film Vault, ESTV, and Motorvision.tv.
Racing for Green is here to help you carbon neutralize your racing. By planting new trees, Racing for Green offers to make your racing carbon neutral. We already have the calculations, contacts, infrastructure, deals and solutions ready for you to easily buy carbon neutral laps on any racetrack. It doesn't matter if you are a racing fan, team owner, driver, sponsor or partner. Anyone can buy CO2 neutral laps in the Racing for Green webshop and trade CO2 emissions for New Forest. Racing for Green.
A 1v2 for the tournament. Pressure is on.
Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The sun rises at Le Mans here on Friday. It's a very, very important day. We get the final practice session out of the way. Qualifying later on tonight. David Christie in the studio along with Yusuf bin Sahel and Kieran McGinley bringing you the morning breakfast show. Thanks to our huge commercial partners over at Viper Gaming by Patriot, Noco, the No Carbs company, Aztec, Global Flix, Film Vault Limited, ESTV, Motorvision.tv, and Sten Goldman at Eaton Shirts for our lovely, lovely wares. By the way, Yusuf and Kieran, if you find your spare shirts gone, please don't look in my bag. Gentlemen, good morning. Welcome along. This is finally it. We're here. We're now getting down to crunch time here at Le Mans.
We are indeed, and just to add fuel to the fire, or more like water to the fire, it has rained, and as you can see from the pit lane, you can see how much it's actually come down. I was just having a look at some of the drivers, especially in the last sector and heading through the Ford chicanes. It is treacherous out there, and this isn't looking good for the drivers later on in the qualifying session. We're just seeing the radar of what's happened earlier on today. It's sort of light rain drizzle, but it's done enough to really make the drivers, well, they ought to jump in here and get a feel of these weather conditions.
And you can see the puddles out on circuit as well. I don't know how hard it's been raining overnight, but it's the first chance for the drivers, at least on the official server, to get a taste of what might be to come in qualifying in the race, maybe fine-tune their setups a little bit for these very treacherous conditions.
this was coming. This was a heavy probability of rain at some point over the weekend, and yet all we've had is dry weather running. How important is this morning session that we've got going on here as we find a couple of cars in LMP2 really struggling with these conditions? Do you think to this point the teams will be happy with the preparations that they've made?
I think the more preparation you have, the better. In fact, in all honesty, if you're planning to run a dry setup for the race regardless of the weather, it would make sense to run this session in the wet with your dry setup and see exactly what the car's going to do, how it reacts and how it behaves in these changeable conditions. And this is the perfect opportunity right here for the teams.
Absolutely, and I was going to say the exact same thing, Kieran. You need to be trying those dry setups. There's the dream team, as we like to say, having a bit of a nightmare out there into the Porsche curves. But no, it is a chance for the teams to use that dry setup in the wet conditions, and a chance, or maybe a final chance for the drivers to essentially say, no, we can't run with this setup in the wet. It is too stiff. It is too snappy. We need to make a couple of adjustments before we head on into the race.
Now, again, we're obviously seeing the Dream Team going back into to pit lane there. Very treacherous conditions out there, and it does make me wonder how well prepared these teams are for conditions like this, given that there is a significant chance that we're going to have a heavy downpour over the race weekend. Again, all we're going on is the forecast here. We spoke to in the official press conference last night the likes of Team Rookie Monsters, and they were suggesting that they were going to go for a more aggressive, harder setup that would possibly benefit them in the dry, but something that's as twitchy and as nervous on the car, Yusuf and Kieran, how do we think that would benefit in the rain? Because for my opinion, I think the last thing you want is a car that's nervous and a little bit unstable in wet conditions.
I think it mainly comes down to what class you're in. I think certain cars, certain classes are a little bit snappier or a little bit more unstable than others. Again, throwing to that interview that Kieran had with Henry Cynic, talking about how the DPIs can be very snappy, and it's a bit similar for the LMP2s. So I do think when we look towards the prototypes, they're going to be less likely to be running a full dry setup and more shifting towards that kind of interim setup, whereas the GT cars, I personally think they're more capable of running in the wet conditions with a stiff setup, with that dry setup.
Yeah, the problem is they've got to try and find that balance of compromise, because, you know, here at Le Mans, the Circuit de la Sarthe, it's a circuit that's got a little bit of everything. It's got high-speed corners, but it's also got the Mulsanne straight, where if you have any bit of drag there, you're going to leave yourself vulnerable down those long straights. So you've got to be really careful about where you make your compromises and how much aero, how stiff you actually do make the car, because it might fall back on you if it turns out to be majority dry. I mean, look at that, the Nightmare car, the 777, fighting the wheel, heading through the Corvette curves. I mean, it just shows you how treacherous it is out there. Yeah,
I'm watching the on board with the Dream Team car as well, and it's a difficult one, because obviously there's a lot of water everywhere, but where the water is pooled is exactly where you don't want it to be, on the braking points where the car is transferring that weight from the back of the car to the front axle, and then the car just seems, especially with these LMP2s, it appears that the car is just going straight on in a position there they really don't want it to be. But obviously it's early days. This is just in terms of the weekend, this is almost insignificant. This is more the teams just getting extra data for the preparations that they're doing, and some last minute checkups and things like that. But we turn our attention to qualifying tonight, and we've spoken about sandbagging extensively over the past couple of days. Now, how serious a thing do we think that is? What sort of teams should we be looking out for tonight in the different classes, and who are we going to be surprised at if we see in the pole of their class? We'll take that to you, Kieran, first. So many questions.
Yeah, so many questions, but I would have to say, looking at the weather forecast, there's going to be at least one qualifying session that's going to be affected by rain. I think, Yusuf, you touched on it last night, that the forecast we had last night, we were going to get a drying track for the first qualifying session. Now, whether that's changed, it might have changed over time, but if that's the case, then that's all signs that the track is going to get better and better. It's going to improve all the time. So you really don't want to miss out on the opportunity where the track's going to be at its best. Whether how much water is on the track at that point is going to be, throwing that to the wind. So in that case, I think we've got ourselves a very unpredictable first qualifying session. If you throw rain into any mix, you're really going to mix up the field, and teams may not be focusing on who their fastest driver in the dry is. They might be looking for their wet weather specialists at that point.
And I think one of the interesting things to mention is kind of following on what you just talked about, Kieran, the wet weather specialist. It's not even just that, because if you had a full out wet session, you can say, okay, we want these drivers to go out. But if it's a drying circuit, you don't have the luxury of having 2 hours saying, okay, driver A, you head out now, driver B, you head out, driver C, head out, you all get some track time in, we'll see which one of you is quicker. No, someone has to make that hard decision and say, we've got 10 minutes where this track is drying at the end. Who do we put out to bang in a lap? And sometimes you could pick the wrong driver. Sometimes you don't even want the faster driver. You might want the consistent driver who can find that grip, just so that when the track is at its grippiest, you know that they'll be able to put in a solid lap.
And the other thing is that it's a long lap here at the Circuit de la Sarthe. You're talking 3 minutes 20 at best so far of a dry hot lap round this circuit. Now, if you're talking an out lap in the wet, that's closer to 4 minutes in some of the top cars. So you've really got to make that strong decision, and by the time you've put on a set of wet weather tyres and said this is the setup we're going to go for, a lot can change in 4 minutes, let alone any other time. So coming to that risk and reward is going to be down to that final lap in qualifying one.
Just two things that I've picked up on our session this morning as well is, one is how quickly the cars are losing heat from the tyres if they have any sort of spin or movement off of the racing line. The second actually is the fact that there is a significant racing line appearing on the track in these wetter conditions. And again, I wonder how much of this is the drivers actually deciding to try and learn where these dry lines are appearing and how to stick to them, because you have to really stay on them. If you go off them, especially through a corner, that's where you immediately start to lose traction in an unpredictable way. But qualifying tonight, again, a very nebulous question here, but how important really in the whole grand scheme of the race weekend is qualifying going to be? If a team, for example, has a poor qualifying performance, can we automatically presume that they're going to struggle in the race, or do we not add that much weight onto how they qualify?
I mean, I'll let Yusuf answer that one first.
Absolutely not is my answer to that. I think we've seen time and time again drivers being able to perform well in a race even if they haven't worked well in qualifying, and that's because of a variety of reasons. One, sometimes you just get a bad lap in qualifying. Yes, it's a 2 hour long session, but the track is still quickest towards the end of the session. We've seen sometimes teams leaving the session and forgetting to rejoin. They're at the back of the grid, albeit that's an exception. You kind of know what their pace is regardless. But then you have other incidents as well, or other points as well, where some teams are really, really good at strategies. We've seen that from DIS actually back last year in the Endurance Racing World Championship when they clinched the GT3 title. And then it's also about how good is the depth of your team. One team you might just have a one-trick wonder. DIS again, Andy Kurtzen, phenomenally quick driver, but the question is always asked, how quick is the rest of the team? You look towards other teams like Satellite Racing now, very quick drivers all around.
Yeah, and I mean, Andy Kurtzen, you were saying in the press conference yesterday, his focus was on the 54 and securing third place in the championship. That's the priority for the team. So for DIS, they're looking for that, and it's going to be made even more difficult with the changeable weathers the entire weekend. The one thing you don't want in a qualifying session is any variables, any changeable variables. It would be lovely to have a completely dry track, a track that's rubbered in, but for the teams here, all that hard work and effort for the open practice so far has literally, and pardon the pun, been washed away.
The other talking point is obviously we've had several sessions that we've all been watching over the past couple of days now. We are starting to get to crunch time. It's starting to become into one of the most important days in preparation and getting your setup nailed down. Are there any teams and drivers that have like significantly stood out to you, or if you were betting betting gentlemen, if you had the commentary 50p piece, who would you be looking forward to, or who would you personally be rooting for?
Kieran, do you want to go first on that? Or
see
do you want
what
some
he's
time
done
to
is
think on it?
yeah.
I've got some answers ready to go.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I don't want to put the commentary curse on any single team, so I'd.
I'm more than happy to put the commentator curse on team.
Wait, hang on.
you go
have
for
you
it,
got
you said.
vested interest
So-
there?
I think anyone who votes against Vargas Sim Racing in the LMP2, anyone who's against 64 Satellite Racing, I think they're very brave men, personally. I think both of the teams have been phenomenally quick all season long, and sure, for Satellite Racing and the DPI Plus has not been around for that long. So, yes, the DPI's not been around for that long, but we've seen the likes of Henry Sinning and James Zuber for a while, and they've always been phenomenally quick.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I think Joel Barbosa yesterday was showing us in the dry. He's a very quick driver in the LMP2 class. So, still all bets are not off for Juices Motorsport. They've still got a good chance of grabbing pole position, and it wouldn't be a surprise pole at that, because Barbosa's been putting in the consistent laps yesterday and showing us that he has a quick turn of pace that he could definitely use in qualifying. The only problem is that his full potential? Were other teams sandbagging, and was Barbosa sandbagging himself? Well, those are all questions that will be answered later on tonight in about, 7 hours time.
Yeah, it's not going to be too long before we actually get the dust to settle. Just a reminder for our breakfast show this morning, if we do have any teams and drivers out there do want to take part, feel free to jump into the Google Meet link that you were given, and we will bring you in by the powers of the internet, and we will grill you quite politely. Well, I'll try.
I love
I
being
can't
grilled for breakfast.
You're making me hungry now, to be honest. That's we did have a lovely breakfast this morning. We do have to say a huge thank you to the wonderful hospitality of our fantastic hosts here, Peter Munkholm and John Fabricius, for welcoming us into Denmark with open arms, and wonderful country, and so privileged, as we said all the time, to be part of this. But gentlemen, let's have a look here to the race itself then, because obviously this is going to be one of the biggest events of the year for these drivers and for these teams. And with all of us, we all enjoy a little bit of sim racing, we all enjoy a little bit of dabbling. As we see team, yeah, that's going to be another addition to the damages bill for the weekend. They're going through front nose cones like they're ice cream cones. But back to the preparations for the race now. Put yourselves in the minds of the drivers and the teams, and what do you think are the preparations that are involved for this? What do you think's going through the minds of the drivers, on the eve of qualifying, on the brink of qualifying, on the eve of the race as well? Do you think they're nervous? Do you think they're just eager to go, or just wanting to get this over and done with? Yusuf, we'll go with you first.
I always used to have this weird thing whenever I'd race, especially towards the start of the season or heading into a big race, where I'd always start shivering before a race. And I don't know why, but I'd just be there and I'd just be really cold, shivering, and then I'd put on a jumper and I'd be really hot. And I know, okay, if I keep this jumper on, I'm going to be sweating like crazy. So you just have to take the jumper off and just shiver. But that's me personally. I think most of the drivers here, they've had enough endurance races this season in the Endurance Racing World Championship, in other series that they're competing in. So I think it's just doing what they've been doing all season long, which is have faith in your own abilities, get some practice laps in, and then just before the race, sit back, relax for a second before the lights go out.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think drivers are going to be nervous, and if you're not nervous before a race, then you're not invested in it, I don't feel. There's always going to be a sense of nerves. There's whether you show it or not. Some drivers are really good at hiding their nerves and making it look like they're cool on the outside, and giving that cool demeanour, which can instill a little bit of question the other teams as well. Well, why is he so cool about everything? What does he know that I don't? Trying to play those little bit of mind games, even from the offset, is going to be a major part in some of the team's approach. I mean, Max Spooner from Team Ebrit yesterday sums it up for me. In these races, you don't pick the winner. Le Mans picks the winner. And it really will come down to that. Over the 24 hours of the race, we'll see some drivers will make mistakes. There will be some problems faced by some, if not all, of the teams. It's not Le Mans if it doesn't. And the best part of it is, it's how you manage those issues. If you don't let them end the world, if you don't let them end the race, it's your reaction to them that will define the rest of your race.
Yeah, that's actually a great point, and it brings us on to talking about crisis management and risk aversion and how you deal with those incidents if your car goes off and you hit the wall. And again, it's one of the parts of racing or sim racing and even real life racing that I don't think gets prepared enough for. What to do, and that joke about in case of emergency break glass, and we'll possibly see quite a lot of broken glass over the course of the weekends. But we've seen it through the practice sessions where one accident usually leads to another, where they're trying to nurse a broken car, or even worse, trying to go exactly back at full speed on a car that they have got absolutely no idea. Now, given that it's a 24-hour race here, twice around the clock at Le Mans, how do you think the drivers are going to be approaching that? Again, for many of them, this is not going to be their first rodeo. They're going to know exactly what's at stake here. Do you think there's a risk for the newer teams and the newer drivers that, when something bad happens, that maybe they either panic or that they actually cause themselves more mischief than actually needs to happen to them?
In terms of crisis management, it's difficult to say, because I think when they've got one of the Dream Team cars there that's actually found themselves on the other side of the wall. They locked up, aquaplaned, and unfortunately met the wall. There's only 26 letters of the alphabet, so you can only have 26 plans in my order. You can only remember 26 of them. So in terms of crisis management, it is always very difficult, because you have no idea what you're going to face. You have no idea what sort of problems you are going to face over the next 24 hours. It's impossible to prepare properly, but if you have a vague idea of what to do in most scenarios, you'll have the upper hand. You'll have an idea. You'll be more prepared. I don't think you'd be 100% prepared for anything that's thrown your way, because anything could go wrong. That's the beauty of racing, of sim racing, of motorsport, is that you don't know what's going to go wrong. It's how you react to the unknown that will define your race.
Actually, that's a good point, Yusuf, because on that then, is there an argument for almost not preparing for disaster management, in terms of, you don't want your subconscious to inadvertently go and do anything that makes it something like that actually happen, and then just go, right, we'll deal with it as it happens, and we're not going to plan for anything going wrong, because nothing's going to go wrong, and try and use that positive mental attitude.
It's a weird one, because obviously you do want to be prepared, and I think it comes down to maybe creating those plans, and sometimes you don't need to tell the driver, and just say to the driver when something does happen, okay, this is what we're going to do, if you feel that information could unsettle the driver. And it's a case-by-case argument. I mean, even as commentators, I think I've worked with commentators sometimes who like to script the entire pre-show and know everything that they're going to say in order, and then other commentators who are more happy just to wing it, let it be a bit more natural. And one thing I want to say, following on from what Kieran was mentioning, is when you have incidents, and this is something that I brought up in the last race at Spa, and I can't remember who it was. I'm fairly sure it was Mugen, because they had a bad race. They had an incident and they left the driver out on the circuit. They brought the car into the pits, and they left the driver in the sim. And sometimes I think that's just such a big mistake, because that driver is understandably going to be incredibly frustrated, especially if they've spun from the lead, something like that. They head out of the pits and they're just more fired up. More mistakes happen, and that's exactly what happened to Mugen. They ended up having 2 or 3 mistakes in the space of a few minutes, and it threw their race down the gutter. So that's something else to be aware of. Listening to your driver. Just because your driver says that he's okay, it doesn't mean you want him in the car. Give him a timeout, give him a chance to take a breather, throw him into a practice server to have a few laps just to get back in the groove of things while another drives out. So I think that flexibility is also something very important for teams.
Kieran, on that, again, segues very nicely, as if we've sort of scripted this all out, but it segues us into the immense pressure that these drivers put on themselves to perform and perform consistently over the 24 hours. Now, Yusuf's brought up the idea that a driver, after they've had an accident, they're mentally all over the place. They're trying to push hard to recover the mistake that they've seemingly made. And from my own personal experience, having done in real life the C1 24 hours at Silverstone, I spun the car in the middle of the night, lost us about maybe 2 minutes from that, and I was absolutely all over the place. Like I was nearly in tears from I've almost ruined this race. In sim racing, would you imagine that that's a comparable thing? And do you think that the drivers still feel that same sort of pressure if they make a mistake to try and get that, to try and fix that error that they've made? And if so, do you think that, like Yusuf says, leaves them more vulnerable to making more mistakes?
I think most drivers, when they come off of a stint, are almost always dissatisfied because there's always something that's lurking in the back of their mind. They didn't take this apex right. And for some drivers, they will sort of dwell on that for quite a while. I know I'm subject to that. I'll miss an apex and dwell on it for the next 3 quarters. You're not fully focused on the rest. That's why I'm this side of a microphone now. But I think the pressure on a driver is obviously immense, and it can unfold in that driver making a mistake. But what they've got to remember is there's loads of other drivers out there in the field. They're all going to come across some sort of mistake, whether it's a little bit of a locked brake, whether they carry too much speed through the corner, maybe understeer slightly, maybe they don't take the Porsche curves as well as they could. All forms of mistakes will be shown over the next 24 hours. The important thing is not to beat yourself up about it, not to kick yourself, because yes, the mistakes happened, but realistically, how much time is that going to cost you? If you keep it out of the walls, it's going to cost you half a minute. What's half a minute over 24 hours? It's plenty of time, especially if you make the mistake early, to make up that lost time.
Perfect.
And it's that risk management, isn't it? Because you can be absolutely pelting it around the track, gaining a second a lap, but your chance of winning it goes through the roof. And having done, again, this kind of goes back to some of the IRL karting 24-hour races that I've done. It's always nice when you've got multiple stints and you've got a break between your stints, I find, because you are able to come off that stint, you're able to take a sit back, watch your teammate go out, watch the other drivers out there, and just have a think about your stint, the little mistakes that you were making, how can you improve on that? And then when you jump back in the car, you're not thinking, I need to find 2/10 a lap. You're just thinking, okay, I kind of know I want to do these few things a little bit differently, and you're able just to go out a lot more calm, a lot more composed, and find that little bit of extra time that can sometimes be critical.
I think as well, sorry, I was just going to interrupt you there, David, but with a team manager, I think a lot of the pressure comes on them as well, especially when it comes to changeable weather conditions. When we are expecting changeable weather conditions across the entire race, there will be rain, there will be sunshine, there will be all sorts of weather fronts hitting Le Mans over the weekend, and the team manager has to decide who is the best person in the car for these conditions. And one eye will definitely be on the strategy. And it will change on the fly. It might change even 5 minutes before the driver change is due to happen. So they've got to be on the ball, and it's those strategic decisions that we were talking about last night that could define your race as well. Putting the right driver in the car at the right time with the right conditions can unlock so much.
Team chiefs then, team leaders, team managers, whatever we want to call them, obviously they are the ones in charge of the strategy and making all the calls, but we've got some of them that are actually drivers as well, that are actually taking part as part of the team. Now, I always think that that's going to make the job infinitely more difficult because they don't have that sort of disconnected viewpoint of everything that's going on. They've got what's, their stint as well. Do you think that team managers who are not going to be driving the car have a benefit over those who are, or do you think that it's 50-50 because there's the argument that team managers who are driving maybe feel more connected and understand the car a little bit better?
It's difficult to say. There are advantages and disadvantages of it. The advantage is that you've got a team manager who is a driver, and so that could lift the team. If they have a good stint, it will lift the team to no end. But at the same time, that team manager might not be seeing the full picture. if it comes down to a strategic decision, whether it involves the weather, they might not see the full picture. They might not have all the telemetry, all the information in front of them that they need to make the right call at the right time. So there might be a little bit of tunnel vision when they're in the car, understandably so, because you're focused on setting those consistent and quick lap times. So I think there are advantages and disadvantages, but I think the team sort of weighed up those advantages, those disadvantages, and will go with the decision they've made purely on that basis that, yes, this is the right call.
I want to cheat a bit on this because it's a very important topic, and it's one that we could pretty much sit and have a podcast on its own about, 30-minute long, maybe an hour-long podcast. But I think the key thing that comes into it, no matter who is making the decision, is communication. You have to be able to communicate with your team. And I know as a fan, when I watch Formula One, for example, and there was that whole Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton thing back in Russia, and then in Russia, and then there was one more recently in Turkey. I'm a big fan of drivers going against the team, and the driver saying, no, I'm in the car, I know what's happening, I have faith in my abilities, I'm going to make the call. But in endurance racing, I don't think that's the case, because you need to have a lot more trust in your team. There's a lot more strategy. And I think one big important point is whoever is in the car should not be making that call. I think you do need to have the wider perspective. Personally, I think it is a close call between having a driver who is a team manager or just having someone independent. I personally think someone independent is a better shout, especially if they are a driver in their own regards, as in they do sim racing, they jump on into servers with their drivers every now and then, build up some of that kind of team building atmosphere.
Well, certainly lots to talk about this morning on the breakfast show. Still to come, we're going to be chatting about the circuit as well, the legendary Circuit de la Sarthe, aka Le Mans. We'll also be talking about traffic in the different classes, and a little bit more about the different classes in general. For just now, though, we're going to take a very short commercial break. We'll be back after this.
Round 6 of the 2021 GTR24H EEW season, Le Mans, is presented in partnership with Viper Gaming by Patriot, Azatec, Global Flix, Film Vault, ESTV, and Motorvision.tv.
Racing for Green is here to help you carbon neutralize your racing. By planting new trees, Racing for Green offers to make your racing carbon neutral. We already have the calculations, contacts, infrastructure, deals and solutions ready for you to easily buy carbon neutral laps on any racetrack. It doesn't matter if you are a racing fan, team owner, driver, sponsor or partner. Anyone can buy CO2 neutral laps in the Racing for Green webshop and trade CO2 emissions for new forest. Racing for Green.
A 1v2 for the tournament. Pressure is on.
then, ladies and gentlemen, official practice number 2, the final practice of the week here for the Le Mans final of the EEWC, and I'm honestly so beyond excited. Dave Christie here alongside with Yusuf bin Suhail and Kieran McGinley over in the corner there. Alex Goldschmidt, our fearless leader, has decided to go on a little bit of an excursion. He's enjoying the sights and sounds of Denmark when really he's actually, I think, having a look for some essential computer components like cables and things like that. He's essential, yeah. He's really living the luxury lifestyle today, but he'll be joining us later on. As always, we'll be doing another episode of Kieran McGinley's ridiculously awesome podcast. If you haven't heard that so far, go and check it out on GTR24H.org. And we've got to say a huge thank you as well to Chris Buxton, who will be joining us throughout the weekend, and as well to Ewan O'Leary. I want to give a shout out to the amount of articles that young lad is putting out right now. He's putting us all to shame, really, is he?
Yeah, he is. But I've always said my, writing. I do talking better. I do talking and shouting better. But yeah, Ewan's been absolutely smashing it. The interviews he's got, the amount of content he's producing for the website as well is absolutely astonishing. So yeah, full shout out to him. Ewan, you're absolutely smashing it.
Speak for yourself, Kieran. I can't do the writing or the talking.
That's why we're here holding it while Alex is away out doing some shopping.
This is why Kieran's allowed on his own. You need to be here to babysit me.
After last night, really? That's let's not go there.
Definitely after last night.
God.
A huge thank you as always to our commercial partners, Viper Gaming by Patriots in Noco, the no carbs company drink. I've got to say, we have literally survived all week on these things. We've had very many late nights, and they've saved our backside quite a few times. To Ace Tech, to Global Flicks, to Filmvolt Limited, ESTV, Motorvision.tv, and Sten Goldman at Eaton Shirts. And we don't really need to say any more about Eaton Shirts, do we? Because we've really done the shilling this week, because they are so blooming nice. Actually, so much so that I've now no longer got a t-shirt on underneath this. I'm just
they're so
straight.
Nice that
it feels even better.
You risk broadcast starting being bare top to get the show.
It was like 2 minutes to go, and I was like, right, I'm taking the t-shirt off. But yeah, they are absolutely luxurious. And I don't know if this says more about me being a Scottish person, but this is probably the nicest thing I've ever worn. Anyway, back to more serious things. Official practice 2 underway as well. I can see Yusuf face-palming here. Let's talk a little bit about the track then, because Le Mans, one of the most legendary endurance circuits around the world. Gentlemen, is there any specific part of Le Mans that catches your attention more than others, or is it the whole package in general? Kieran, we'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think you've got to say the whole package. This track has a little bit of everything. It's got the Mulsanne Straight, it's got the slow speed corners when you've got a high speed challenge of Indianapolis, having to turn the car and try and slow it down at the same time. How brave are you on the brakes? And then you've got the Porsche curves, the Corvette curves, the high speed corners where you've got to be brave to carry as much speed through there as possible. And then you've got the Ford chicanes where if you've set the car up too stiff, the car's going to bite back on you. It's a track that's just got everything, and the perfect package really you need here at Le Mans. It's so difficult to find, but when you find it, when you find that sweet spot, when you get into the rhythm, Le Mans becomes your best friend until it doesn't.
For me, as a driver, I really like going through Tete Rouge, something I've mentioned before, and then the run into Indianapolis. They both feel like corners where you've got to be on the absolute limit. But I think from a spectator standpoint, Porsche curves. Because again, high speed, you're carrying so much speed through it, and I think I mentioned yesterday in the broadcast, it's the one real place on the track where if you catch traffic, you've got to have some big uns to be able to go around the outside and get through as quickly as possible, because otherwise you're stuck throughout the Porsche curves, even the Chevy curves, and you can lose a fair amount of time.
Yeah, I have to agree with Tete Rouge, because it's such an important corner on the circuit, because obviously going down the Mulsanne Straight, that all starts from your exit from Tete Rouge, and you have to keep the exit speed high. For myself though, it has to be those chicanes on the Mulsanne Straight. Not so much the actual corners, but what they represent, the idea that the cars were going so fast that they had to artificially put in 2 chicanes just to slow them down. That makes me very, very giddy at what could be if they weren't there. But also that Mulsanne Straight, for these LMP2 and these DPI car drivers, that is going to be the position where they realise they are in absolute rocket ships, as you've got maybe 4 or 5 different cars of different classes that you're zooming by at light speed. Scary enough in the daytime, absolutely spectacular at nighttime. And talking about nighttime, gents, Le Mans is a track that completely transforms itself into a different animal at night, doesn't it? Because you lose all the braking markers, but the vibe changes as well. It becomes a very, very intimidating place to be, Yusuf.
It's weird because we've been talking about this all weekend about Le Mans at night is going to become so much more difficult, and we've been talking as well about how certain drivers prefer the night, some drivers dislike the night. I believe it was Mugen Sim Racing where they said all of their drivers prefer driving in the nighttime, but for other drivers it's going to be a case of yes, the brake markers are gone. I think another big thing that we have to mention is not the fact of the change in lighting at the circuit, but also a fact that there are different drivers who are driving on different time zones as well, and you're racing at 2 a.m. at night, and that tiredness can really hit you, Kieran.
Yeah, it can. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned the time zones, because we there are a couple of time zones where we've got a couple of Americans racing as well. So whenever it is nighttime at the circuit here in Le Mans, it would probably be daylight when the Americans are racing anyway. So it's going to be a case of, well, around them it's going to be daytime, but then in the sim it's night. So it would throw me off, and that's why I'm not racing. So, but yeah, any nighttime driving is just such an intense challenge, because one thing we are going to see is, well, the regulations on the flashing of the headlights, which of course is being clamped down on. You can only do it, I think it's a maximum of 4 times or 2 seconds you're allowed to flash the headlights at somebody, and then otherwise you get a penalty. So really, you've got to make sure that you're on it. You can't get frustrated with the lights as well, but also at the same time, we touched on it last night, you have no idea what sort of car's coming up behind you with just lights alone. You have absolutely no idea. And as Yusuf said, at that point in the stage, at that point at night, communication is so key. You need to know who's behind you, who are you racing, is the car behind worth fighting for that position? No, let them go.
That actually, the lighting or the headlights ruling that's being clamped down on, that makes me so happy. That's one of my biggest bugbears in sim racing, is the gratuitousness of the use of headlights. When on a straight and you're nowhere near actually passing a car, it's and used as a distraction technique rather than for notifying cars or things like that. So I'm delighted to hear about that. Let's actually talk about that, because traffic during the night is going to be one thing, but in general, the traffic, how much of an issue do we think that's going to play over the course of the 24 hours here? Obviously, through the different classes, you've got the different closing speeds. It adds a different challenge, but Kieran, when you're bringing into strategy and you're having to think of risk management from that point of view, how careful are these drivers going to have to be around the different class cars?
At that point, we'll find out. Some drivers are very aggressive, or as we see one of the Dream Team cars have a little bit of a spin there. That's going through the forward chicanes there. Yeah, you'll see some drivers really take liberties with, if they see an open door on a GT car and they're in a DPI, they're going to go for it. They're going to go for that gap. You'll have others that are a little bit more patient. Maybe they'll use their headlights a little bit more just to let them know they're there. It really comes down to where they meet on the circuit. If it's at the Mulsanne Straight, absolutely fine. You can pull to one side as a DPI car and make your way through. But when it comes to this type of endurance, it is up to the team that is putting the lap on the driver to get their way past safely. It's not on the driver being lapped to make sure that's the case. All they've got to do is stick to their racing line and let the car that's trying to get the lap on them find their way past. And I think that's the unwritten rule that for some, they do forget that.
And Yusuf, that's actually a brilliant point about the blue flag rule for some of our viewers who are maybe more familiar with the likes of F1, where that is mandated. They've got to let the car pass by 3 flags. But that's not how it works here in endurance racing. They've just got to be aware that there is a faster car coming and not fight with them. Again, blue flags are almost constantly going to be flashing over the 24 hours. Are the drivers almost going to become immune to them in terms of paying attention to them and just driving their own race anyway?
I think you have to. I remember the first endurance race I had, it was GT3s only on a set of Corsa Competizione at Imola, and I was not having a good race, let's put it like that. Came out of the final corner, there was a car behind me, and I just thought, you know what, I just want him out of my way, get my head down. I don't want him chucking it down my inside into turn 1. So coming out of the final corner through the right kink onto the start-finish straight, I pulled to the left with him about a second or so behind, and I lifted. And he just ran into the back of me, like completely offline, and blamed me afterwards. And you know what, fair enough, because he expects me to stick on that racing line. And as a driver being lapped, as a driver being lapped, you have to just ignore the blue flags. You just stick to your racing line. But the important thing is to be aware. And that goes for both parties, the car that's being lapped, the car that's lapping, because if you are being lapped, you have to be aware that this is an LMP2 or a DPI car that is going to stuff it down your inside if it gets the slightest of opportunity. So you need to be ready to be able to quite simply abort and give a little bit of room at the apex.
I'm just a little bit distracted here. Eduardo Espinosa on YouTube is very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. Signal's so bad all of a sudden. What big race are we talking about? Well, Edward, where have you been? We've been here all week building things up to our biggest race of the year here at GTR24H. It is, of course, the finale of the EEWC 2021 Championship here at Le Mans. And it is going to be a very, very special race. Qualifying is going to be later on tonight, so make sure you stick around and join us for that. And as always, hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel and give us a like on the old Facebook page. Very, very much appreciated. Let's go a little bit in depth then, gents, on the actual runners and riders here. We did briefly go over it last night on who we had to pick and who we had that stood out. We were going to talk and put some money on some of the teams, but in terms of the DPI and the LMP2, let's come to them first, because they are fairly similar in a lot of ways, and very, very different in quite a few others as well. The age-old battle between the LMP2s and the DPIs, how much do you think the weather is going to affect the different cars? And if it is raining and conditions, let's imagine it's conditions like this for a lot of the 24 hours, Kieran, who do you think in terms of the DPIs and LMP2s that's going to favour?
Difficult one to say. I mean, both will have advantages, both will have disadvantages. I think the LMP2 cars, they're going to rely on aero, so they'll need to put more aero on the car. That will chuck up a little bit more spray, of course, but it will make them slower down the straights. So that will be one part of it. But the DPIs, they're a handful anyway. You know, in the dry, they're a little bit snappy. So put a bit of water on the track and they are going to find it a little bit more difficult. It really comes down to how each team tunes up the car, how they make those little changes to try and get a more balanced setup to take them through the whole weekend and through the whole 24-hour race. That's really going to define how that car is going to handle. I mean, we heard from some drivers that, the DPI car is snappy. It's naturally going to, if you push it just slightly over the edge, it's going to come back and snap at you as, that's Roland Schutz there doing a full
in the LMP2, almost on cue. Might not be a DPI, but as if you wanted a perfect prop to showcase your example there, Kieran. That's exactly what happens. And on that note then, just to finish off what you were saying there, how can they mitigate that? Can they mitigate that? Is there anything they can do in terms of setup?
I mean, it is tough to say. Softening the suspension could work, but you leave yourself vulnerable to, if you've already got a low ride height, you're going to struggle with that down the Mulsanne straight. It is bumpy down there, so you might find yourself struggling with that just slightly. But at the same time, you don't want to make too many tweaks that's going to disadvantage you in the dry. Your focus really should be on the dry running, because that's when the car is going to be the fastest. And if that turns out to be the majority of the session, you don't want to spend a majority of the session in a car that's not going to be as quick as anybody else. So it's finding that balance of a dry setup that works in the wet. Not necessarily is the quickest wet weather setup, but is doable. You can measure it, and you can try and keep those mistakes down. I mean, I'd much rather be shouting over this rather than racing in it, because I would have absolutely no chance of keeping it on the track in the dry, let alone the wet.
Yusuf, on the subject of the DPIs, now me and you have got a little bit of experience, because yesterday in the dry we had a shot on the sim rig here, and it was an absolute handful, wasn't it, in the dry?
It was. And I'm kind of glad you didn't give the question you gave to Kieran to me, because I honestly feel like I haven't had enough time in either the DPI or the LMP2 to really say which one does better in the dry or wet. But again, Kieran, in your wonderful interview with Henry Sinnick, he was talking about the change from the hypercar to the DPI and how he finds, I think he was saying the DPI is a bit snappier than the LMP2 car. And all that kind of tells me from a logical standpoint, well, if it's snappy and you get into the wet, it's going to be even worse. So I would personally imagine that the LMP2 is a little bit better in the wet than the DPI, but I could be completely wrong on that regard. And it's a handful. Every time we got on the power out of a corner, you can feel that back end starting to slip on you, and in the wet it becomes even more so the case. So I think the gap's going to still be relatively close between the DPI and the LMP2. So I think the important takeaway is, no matter what the conditions are, I think we're still going to be seeing the prototypes battling against each other throughout the course of the race.
Certainly sets itself up for a fascinating battle. Also, interestingly as well, I don't know if it's just maybe we've not been looking at the DPIs as much, but whenever we've seen this morning on stream any incidents or cars going off, it seems to have been predominantly the LMP2 cars.
It was only the LMP2 cars out at the start of the session.
There we go.
And I think now
why
it's
then.
just LMP2s and a couple of GT cars.
Yeah.
Don't know if any of the DPIs are out this morning yet.
So I'm just having a look at the 585 Aztec SimSport machine, the Audi just now, and again, regardless of the LMP2 and DPI battle, that car as well, just showing how difficult it is actually to make its way around the track. So let's move on then to GTE and GT3, because obviously, like all of the other championships or all of the other classes we've got going on now, Kieran, very, very tight at the top. Not a lot to decide between the cars there, but also the GTEs and the GT3s maybe a little bit further in terms of the performance than the DPIs to the LMP2s. So do you think that's going to be a little bit easier for them, the fact that they're not actually going to be fighting each other in the same way, potentially?
Potentially. I mean, it's such a long race. You just never know what's going to happen. You could find themselves battling for track position at some point. You just never know. I mean, it will be interesting to see what on earth happens, how it'll all play out, and I think qualifying is going to have a major turn in that. You could see a very mixed up grid depending on the circuit conditions, the setups as well. You could find that some of the DPIs are mixed in with the LMP2s, and that's going to be a very interesting race start when it all comes to be.
Excellent stuff. So I'm just watching on board with one of the cars just now, and I'm actually seeing the current conditions. It looks like the track is actually getting worse, because it looks like that dry line that was appearing is actually starting to disappear as the water runs down the track. And constantly changing conditions, gents. This really sets things up very curiously for qualifying tonight, because obviously we look forward to qualifying now, and for those who are at home watching on the stream, make sure to come back and join us tonight for qualifying number 1, 6 o'clock CEST, Central European Standard Time, and then 9:30 for qualifying 2, and then obviously we then head over into to tomorrow as well. But with the track the way that it is, and it's constantly changing, constantly adapting, do you think that after official practice 2, the teams are going to head off and take a couple of hours to chill out? Or do you think they're constantly going to be keeping an eye on the server, constantly be keeping their toe in and trying to keep themselves fresh?
It's a difficult one to call because, yes, you want to put in the most amount of practice. You want to practice for as many scenarios as possible. But at the same time, you don't want to get yourself fatigued before you've even really got properly going. That's going to be something that's a big thing in Le Mans, and any endurance race is fatigue. It's going to be a huge part to play, and you don't want to be getting yourself too tired too early, because that's when the mistakes are going to start to show, is when you do start getting a little bit tired, the reaction's not quite there, and maybe you're making those slight errors you wouldn't normally make if you were, fully aware and fully fit. So yeah, it's you've got to find that perfect balance between putting in the practice, getting those scenarios, but also having the R&R to calm yourself down, get yourself an hour away from the screen, get yourself an hour away from the rig, and properly give yourself the best chance to give your best performance.
100% agree with Kieran on that. I remember when I was practicing for F1 races, I know some drivers just wouldn't practice on some days because you can over practice and then you get yourself worked up over why can't I find this time here. Take a break, especially on the day of qualifying as well. You've got 2 hours in each qualifying session. You've got 4 hours. There's plenty of time you've got on circuit. So get a bit of time in the official practice server. Jump out, go see some friends, grab yourself a bite to eat. Go to a theme park. Who knows, right? Come back in fresh. Have yourself a good mindset to jump into the race.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. Just finally, before we wrap things up here, and on the note of practice, the Dream Team number 766. Now we've seen them having a bit of a torrid time in practice this morning. Just lifting off of what you said there, Yusuf, how detrimental is that when you bring the car out and you're having these issues time and time again? The car oversteering, spinning out, and even repeatedly at the same corner. How much does that affect you, do you think, as a driver?
A lot. So I think as a team, you've got to do two things. Give the driver some time to keep on going out, putting in some laps, see if they can get around it. And then the other thing that you need to do is put another driver out in the car. Is it a driver issue? Is it a setup issue? If it's a setup issue, that's probably the worst case scenario, because it means you've got something vitally flawed with the car with not long to go before qualifying in the race. So you need to get on top of that as quickly as possible. If it's a driver issue, driver mood swings are insane. So you just need to give them a bit of time, come back in fresh, and job should be a good one.
Well, it's just about time to wrap things up here. Kieran, coming to yourself finally then, looking ahead to qualifying tonight, what excites you the most about this absolute marathon of qualifying that we've got coming up tonight?
Getting absolutely stuck in. I mean, if the forecast is as true as we say, we're expecting more rain to develop and get heavier as well as the day progresses. If it comes to a point where that forecast says that it will be not raining for qualifying but a drying track, well, we've got ourselves a fantastic qualifying session, in a sense that we are going to have the cars out on track to try and get rid of the water from the line. So we might not see the fastest times to begin with to get that water off the line, but as we go through, there'll be a dry line forming, but the other parts of the track will be wet as anything. So you get millimetrically wrong, you're finding yourself that lap time is not just gone, but you might find yourself into the wall along with it.
Yusuf, qualifying tonight, it is a big programme ahead that we've got coming up. What is floating your boat about that?
I'm just excited to see the cars finally pushing to the max and not having any doubt as to whether they are pushing or whether they're sandbagging. And we finally can stop saying, and we finally don't have to bring up, so about sandbagging, guys, because we've been bringing it up every single broadcast so far. And and rightfully so, because it is a thing, and we don't want viewers to be looking at the times thinking, okay, this is how things are going to pan out, because, well, A, it's not every team out on the server, and B, sandbagging's a thing. So qualifying's going to come, we're going to see drivers pushing, it's going to be absolutely wonderful. And I think we should remind all of our viewers as well when that race is going to be starting as well, because we've had a few new viewers in the chat, which is always wonderful to see.
Yeah, so race time tomorrow is going to be at 3 o'clock Central European Standard Time. You are not going to want to miss it. But qualifying tonight, qualifying 1 is at 6 p.m. Central European Standard Time. Qualifying 2 at 9:30 p.m. Central European Standard Time. Keep an eye on our social medias for that. But from myself, Dave Christie, from Yusuf bin Sahel, and from Kieran McGinley, it's a huge thank you to our partners over at Viper Gaming by Patriot, Noco, the No Carbs Company, to Ace Tech, to Global Flix, thank you very much for that, Yusuf, to Filmvolt Limited, ESTV, Motorvision.tv, and Eaton Shirts for their support. A huge thank you to our production team behind the scenes. Join us tonight for qualifying for the big one, the EWC 2021 Championship finale here at Le Mans. We'll see you very, very soon indeed.
Round 6 of the 2021 GTR24H EEW season, Le Mans, is presented in partnership with Viper Gaming by Patriot, Azatec, Global Flix, Filmvolt, ESTV, and Motorvision.tv.
A 1v2 for the tournament. Pressure is on.
Racing for Green is here to help you carbon neutralize your racing. By planting new trees, Racing for Green offers to make your racing carbon neutral. We already have the calculations, contacts, infrastructure, deals and solutions ready for you to easily buy carbon neutral laps on any racetrack. It doesn't matter if you are a racing fan, team owner, driver, sponsor or partner. Anyone can buy CO2 neutral laps in the Racing for Green webshop and trade CO2 emissions for New Forest. Racing for Green.